Hello and welcome to this tropical storm short summary. In this short summary here, we are going to be looking at the 1999 typhoon season. As you can see, very typical for the West Pacific, we had a large amount of storms. And when I mean storms here, I'm just talking about the amount of paths, just systems that formed. We would have a total of 45 depressions, 20 tropical storms, which is still a fair bit to be fair, and 5 typhoons. We would also have one unofficial super typhoon because the Joint Typhoon Warning Center based in Hawaii rates those and aren't on any official scale technically, but whatever. At least not on the JMA. Anyway, the season would end up having an accumulated cyclone energy total for the whole season of 109.9. This is actually the lowest ever so far for the Western Pacific. In fact, the 5 typhoons is the record low for any West Pacific season as well. However, these storms still did cause a fair amount of casualties and damage. In total, they would cause 976 deaths, as well as 18.3 billion US dollars in damage. We are first going to take a look at Typhoon Leo. Typhoon Leo began as a depression on the 27th of April. It was a depression at approximately close, or very close to, I should say, 710 kilometers west of Manila, that being if I'm not mistaken, the main island of the Philippines. Leo would become a storm just the next day, and then become a typhoon on the 30th here. However, some of the agencies list that it did not become a typhoon until a little bit later. I believe that the CMA and HKO, so the two Chinese agencies, said that it was later, but I'm going with what the JMA has to say and what the JTWC has to say about it. I'm sorry. It would be around the time before the Leo became a typhoon, while it's doing this little loop right here in the South China Sea, that Vietnam would receive 5 inches of rain. The HKO, which stands for the Hong Kong Observatory, would issue their wind signal number 8, which I believe is the second highest that can be raised, or that they raise, and this was done on May 2nd. This is one of the earliest times in the season that a number 8 signal had been raised since records began for them in 1946. So that's a long time. That's a lot of records. Leo would end up peaking on the same day on May 2nd, reaching 125 1-minute sustained winds at a minimum pressure of 970 millibars, specifically stating 1-minute maximum, as is the case with all of the maximum winds here, because the West Pacific scales all use 10 minutes, which is good for strength, but for a different reason. It's just it's more reliable in a way. But I use 1 minute sustained, which thankfully they provide. In any case, sorry, Leo would landfall as a depression and cause light and very minor damage to China. You can see that Leo would end up causing 1 death as well as 14 injuries. Our next storm here is Maggie. Maggie was also known as Etang, as it was named by Pagasa, the Philippines Weather Service. Maggie would end up becoming a storm on June 3rd, just a day after it had gained depression status. For a while before depression status, it's very similar to, if those of you are familiar with the hurricane season out here in the U.S., where the NOAA lists something as like, interest like 91 or whatever. It's that kind of deal before, depression. It's the same deal here. Maggie would become a typhoon only 36 hours after officially becoming a depression, so some pretty rapid intensification there. Maggie would end up peaking on June 5th, reaching 120 miles per hour at a pressure of 955 millibars. This 120 is indeed minimum Category 3 wind speeds. Maggie would end up brushing just to the south of Taiwan, as seen on the track there, and would cause 2 deaths on Taiwan, as well as leave 100,000 people without power. Continuing on with Maggie's path, Maggie would landfall close to Hong Kong as a minimal typhoon and did so on the 7th of June. Before then, Maggie had been producing some quite heavy rains in the Philippines, which contributed to a fair bit of landslides. And due to landfalling as a typhoon, Maggie would damage thousands of homes in China. In total, there would be 9 deaths caused by Maggie and a total of 168 million US dollars in damage. Bart was also known as Oniyang by the Philippines. Um, the Philippines have a very interesting way of naming storms that they still do to this day because, of course, why not be different? I don't like it. Bart was a depression on the 17th of September and then became a storm 2 days later on the 19th, becoming a typhoon just the next day. And then Bart would continue to strengthen as there was a ridge, also known as a high pressure system, to its north, probably around Korea or further upwards or further northwards. And again, Bart would be strengthening at this time, and due to the ridge also remaining nearly motionless, moving very, very slowly, possibly if at all. Bart would peak on September 22nd with 1 minute maximum speeds of 160 miles per hour, just 3 miles per hour above Category 5, at a pressure of a respectable 930 millibars. Bart would only pass 75 kilometers of Okinawa and would do a relative fair amount of damage to Okinawa, and then would landfall on September 23rd, so just a day after its peak. We can see here that Bart had an expedited departure from. It wanted to get the hell away from mainland Asia, of course, obviously. And again, land fell the next day, so it's again September 23rd, near Omuta on Kyushu Island, Japan. Bart land fell with winds of 115 miles per hour. Kyushu would see a maximum rainfall of 46 inches, and Bart would even cause a, albeit minor but still notable for the most part, tornado outbreak. Most tornadoes, for the record, happen in, I believe it is the northeast quadrant of a storm, due to the winds being more favorable there for shear and rotation, for the air being able to get into columns and then start rotating. In total, Bart would cause 36 deaths, 1,314 injuries, and nearly $6 billion in damage. Dan is our next storm here. Dan was also known as Pepang by the Philippines, and Dan would become a storm within 48 hours of formation, becoming a storm on October 3rd. Dan would then peak 2 days after this, so October 5th now, with wind speeds of 125 miles per hour at a pressure of 955 millibars. Dan would strike Luzon, specifically northern Luzon, at its peak. And correction there from an earlier typhoon. The island is Luzon. Manila is the capital of the Philippines. Saying that because I just now remembered because I'm slow. Sorry. Apologies for that mistake earlier. Dan would then proceed to landfall near Xiamen, China. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it did so on October 9th. In China, 1,500 homes were destroyed. In both Taiwan and the Philippines, each received 20 inches of rain. Taiwan's power was disrupted so thoroughly that around 70% of the island was without power. Even though Bart got relatively close to it, but sorry, Dan. Dan got close to Taiwan, but obviously not landfalling on Taiwan, thankfully. Dan would cause 44 deaths and over 1,400 injuries, as well as cause 242 million US dollars in damage. We have a notable season here actually due to the lack of intensity of this West Pacific season. This was also the last Westpac season to use English names. So from then on, a list would be hand done by the JMA, the Japanese Meteorological Agency. And as we saw at the very beginning with our chronology, we had a very, very active both August and September. In fact, August to September is the most active month for tropical activity in general, specifically in the northern hemisphere. Again, like I stated before, this season has the smallest amount of typhoons on record for the West Pacific. Granted, West Pacific records do not go as far back as, say, the Atlantic records, but still, this season also still has like I also mentioned before, the lowest ACE of any Westpac season to date. That is at 109.9. To put that in perspective, the normal ACE for the Atlantic is around 70. That's considered average. And the least active West Pacific season still did a little bit above that at 109. So I the West Pacific is extremely active. It accounts for 1/3 of all tropical storms of nearly any season, and just in total. So truly, the West Pacific is very active. So this is kind of an anomaly for the West Pacific. And that, folks, is all that I have for the 1999 typhoon season. Really notables due sheerly to its inactivity. However, despite that, still plenty of notables to talk about because, like I've been mentioning, the West Pacific region is still extremely active. The number one tropical storm producer in the world. Again, that is all that I have to say for this season. I hope that you all learned something and also enjoyed this video. Now, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you all so much for watching.